Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Uniform, a podcast dedicated to interviewing military leaders in the United States, as well as others around the world, perhaps one day, in sharing their insights, skills, and expertise throughout their journey and careers, as well as their current mission and responsibilities with our audience of listeners, those that are perhaps in ROTCs, in leadership in the United States Army, as well as other branches, as well as perhaps those who might be interested in this field for general interest or perhaps as a form of service in their life in the future. Today, we're honored to welcome Brigadier General Maurice Barnett, Commanding General of the United States Army Cadet Command. With nearly 30 years of service, General Barnett leads the mission to train and commission future Army officers and develop high school JROTC programs. A native of Gary, Indiana, he graduated from Indiana University Northwest and was commissioned into the Air Defense Artillery. And over his distinguished career, he has held multiple leadership roles, including his most recent command in Germany. General Barnett is also deployed in support of major operations like Enduring Freedom and Atlantic Resolve. Thank you, General Barnett, for being on the podcast, our inaugural guest, and no guest better, perhaps, to start this podcast than with the leader who is in charge of training the future leaders of the United States Army.
William, thanks for the warm introduction and allowing me to be your inaugural guest on this great podcast. I look forward to spending some time with you and really talking about something that I am extremely passionate about and have been for over more than the past 30 years, and that's leadership, and more specifically, leadership as it relates to the United States Army.
Absolutely. Well, at a broad level, for our listeners, perhaps those especially not familiar with Cadet Command and the structure of the United States Army, could you share a little bit about the mission of Cadet Command and why it's an integral part of the Army?
Well, the mission is twofold. We recruit, train, retain officers and cadets at universities to create leaders of character in our senior ROTC program in more than 1,000 colleges and universities across the country in our senior ROTC program. So that's part one. And in doing so, we produce roughly 75% of the Army's second lieutenant. That's our most junior leadership positions on the officer side in the Army. The second part of our mission is to build leaders of character in junior ROTC. And I think this is one that most people don't realize that we do in Cadet Command. So every time I have the opportunity to really discuss our total mission and I start talking junior ROTC, which is in high schools, and that's really just our mission to build better citizens and people who have a desire to serve in their community. And we do that at the high school level where young men and young women can participate as cadets in a junior ROTC program. And we have about 1,700 programs across the country in high schools that really service about 300,000 high school students. So in terms of scope and scale at the senior level in colleges and university, we're building leaders of character. In about 1,000 colleges, we have 274 host schools, but we have cadets that attend colleges and universities, about 1,000 of those. And we service about 27,000 to 30,000 senior ROTC cadets there, and 300,000, as I said, at the junior level. So an incredible mission that really spans the country, including junior ROTC programs that are abroad, wherever we have a military base that we station folks. We also, if they have a high school there, we will also have junior ROTC cadets there, including Germany, Italy, South Korea, and Japan. So think about the scope and scale of that on the junior ROTC side.
That sounds both massive undertaking, but also incredibly vital to capture a holistic population of the United States and its armed services in order to produce an army that is representative and also has the skill sets we need. And you're attracting talent from around not only the continental United States, but around the world as well, which I think is wonderful. Diving a little bit deep into that, whether it's at the JROTC level or at the ROTC level, what are the key leadership traits that you and Cadet Command really aims to instill into these cadets or potential cadets? And how do you go about really developing those traits for those individuals at the high school and college level?
Well, we treat them kind of differently. So we have a program of instruction or curriculum for each one of those that we develop here at the higher headquarters in order to ensure. So if you thought about this from a franchise, it's the equivalent of making sure that no matter which franchise you go to, you get the same service and product, right? So if you go to
So the
one high
McDonald's
school,
everywhere, you
yes,
want to make sure they're exactly the same high level of standard.
absolutely. So we're pretty strict on what that curriculum is at the junior level. And I think the commonality in both our junior and senior program, we're trying to create one, better people at the end of the day, right? But more specifically, we're trying to create leaders of character who have competence and are committed to service in general. For the senior ROTC folks, it's service in our total Army, whether that's the active force, the Army National Guard, or the state programs there, or our Army Reserve. So we provide officers to all three of those entities. At the junior level, we're really just foundationally trying to make better citizens who want to serve in their communities and volunteer capacities and otherwise, and really trying to awaken in them those young men and women at the high school level who have a desire to serve in some capacity. But at the end of the day, it's character, competence, and commitment that we're really looking to drive into each one of those young people at both the high school and the college level.
Absolutely. Let's dive into the three C's of leadership, as you just briefly mentioned: character, competence, and commitment. Can you explain the significance of those or how that really is structured in order to instill those values into the cadet command and the cadets?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, on the character side, to me, this is the most obvious one because we are really trying to infuse the morals of the Army, our nation, into young people. We're trying to build leaders of integrity who bring value, build trust in organizations. Some of the same things that any Fortune 500 company or civilian organization will want in their workforce. We're trying to do the same thing from a character standpoint. I think one of the points that you mentioned early in the introduction in terms of global impact, we're drawing folks from every corner of our nation in terms of the junior ROTC side and some on the senior ROTC side because high school U.S. citizens who live abroad, their kids have the same opportunity to participate in the senior ROTC program. So think about the diversity of thought and experience that those folks bring, that common character trait that we're looking for and trying to really instill in some and grow in others because we all come from different places with different backgrounds and we have morals, ethics, and values that we've grown up with or are infused in us through our experiences as young people. And we're trying to shape what the Army values are and pull people into that. So on the character side, that becomes how do we take those people and have this common character system that we infuse in every cadet? On the commitment side, this is really about sharpening the sword, or the competence side. It's about sharpening the sword. It's about making people better, building skills, attributes that at the end of the day don't just resonate in the military or in the Army specifically, but are transferable to any entity in the civilian sector, which makes Army leaders specifically so valuable when they leave the service. It's why companies and organizations look for them because that competence comes with the discipline, integrity, those values that the Army instill in them, which is why people want them. The discipline, the work ethic that our leaders and soldiers get on a daily basis over their careers and time in the Army. And that happens whether you spend 30 years in the Army like I have, or you spend 3 or 4 years like some of our junior officers and soldiers do. That becomes a part of who you are. And then the commitment. I think one of the things that our nation is deeply in need of these days are people who are more willing to serve the country as opposed to serving their own self-interest, right? And I think that touches all three of those, whether that's the character, competence, or commitment. But we're really looking for people who are committed to a mission that is really higher than themselves, more broadly than they think they can do, that serves this really great purpose for what service in our armed forces and specifically the Army can do to someone. And those three, those triangle of character, competence, and commitment, I think is really what creates the value proposition for those young people who decide to be a part of what United States Army Cadet Command, in terms of the Reserve Officer Training Corps at the senior level, ultimately leading to gaining a commission as an officer in the United States Army, whether you're doing that full time in the active component or part time in the National Guard or Reserve. That the three C's really fashion and round out what we expect in officers and build that foundation for the growth of their career and what they will become as a leader, not just for our Army, but more broadly for our nation.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of this next generation, you yourself have served now since nearly 3 decades ago. For many of the younger cadets now entering college or are in college now, many in the Gen Z generation, with this new generation, with new environments, new technologies, new challenges, what are some specific challenges have you encountered from the higher command level in preparing cadets perhaps to lead effectively in today's military environment? And how has Cadet Command really worked to overcome perhaps these challenges that is encountered that changes with each generation?
I guess I'd first start off by saying there's nothing new under the sun, right? If you went back to the greatest generation that fought
Hmm.
World War II, I bet they would tell you that when they got to senior leadership positions, the next generation was vastly different than theirs, right? And I think we face this as a nation when we have this generational changes, and now we have an army that really has what, three or four different generations serving at one time, because some of our most senior leaders are probably uh, you know, were born in the 60s and are now in the most senior. I was born in 1970.
Hmm.
Uh, my highest boss in the Army was probably born in the early 60s. And then we have folks from your generation serving. So now we have this army or service that has multiple generations serving at once. I don't think any of that is really unique. And what it comes down to is how do we see value in what people bring to the Army? I really think some of the things that Gen Z and some of the new generations are bringing to the force in terms of savvy with technology and those kind of things. When you think about the UAS threats, we have a space force, the Army. I'm actually wearing a senior space badge as an Army officer. So think about that. Think about what your generation has touched in terms of technology that, quite frankly, when I was a high school student and college student, there were no cell phones. Let that sink in a little bit, William. And now I lead a force where not only are there cell phones, but the technology has vastly accelerated what my generation probably didn't think was possible in terms of how we communicate and those things. I think we absolutely need a multi-generational force in order to leverage the expertise and the things that each one of those generations bring. We got that blue collar generation from the 60s and the 70s where those folks just had those blue collar jobs and they worked. That's not the case with some of the younger generations. They haven't necessarily had blue collar jobs like that where they work. And I think the value is kind of merging those cultures and leveraging what each one of those, finding the value in each one of those cultures and leveraging those to our benefit, as opposed to having conversations about this generation is different. Maybe they don't see work the same way that my generation is doing. Well, what does that mean? And how do I, as a leader, get the most out of that? I think that becomes the challenge. It's much easier to say that this generation is lazy, rely on technology, look at their cell phones all the time. It's a lot harder to say, how do I leverage what they are really good at to make our Army, to allow our Army to continue to be the best land fighting force that's ever been on this globe? That becomes the challenge. How do we do that as leaders and take the things that each one of those generations, the superpowers that each one of those generations, I think, bring to the force, becomes the leadership challenge. And I think if we look at it from that lens, then it becomes, what value do you have that I can leverage against the problems that we have today? And if you think about what's going on in the Middle East, in Ukraine, and the things that they're seeing, how quickly technology is changing the battlefield, we absolutely need your generation in order to help us solve some of those problems.
That brings us very naturally, I think, to this next segment, which, as you mentioned, we have conflicts around the world today, from the Ukraine to Gaza, conflicts that continues to arise, and with it, new elements that previous generations have not encountered in terms of threats on the battlefield. How has the ROTC program really adapted over time? And in recent years, do you feel, to prepare the cadets for these modern threats, such as cyber warfare, UAS, which are under unmanned aerial systems, drones, for example, as well as we've seen in Gaza, subterranean tactics.
Yeah, I think what it offers. So I had the opportunity, as you mentioned in the opening, I recently moved from Germany where I commanded a theater air and missile defense command. So I really looked at the unmanned aerial system problem that is going on there in that conflict, more so than I've looked at the subterranean threat and things that are going on in Gaza, with two very different problem sets. I'd first offer you that that's not necessarily the role of Cadet Command and ROTC. So we're really trying to get at the basics of officership and not overwhelm them with really hard tactical or strategic problems. I think that comes later through their next phase of military education, and quite frankly, it's more suited for what the general force does, how they educate and do on the job training out in the force. If you set that aside, what I would offer you is that the things that I hear taught and talked about in our ROTC curriculum today far outpaces what I got as a cadet. We weren't talking about UAS or drone warfare. We may have just started to talk about subterranean things because that's not necessarily
Technology.
a new thing. We think it is, but in terms of some of the stuff we were seeing maybe 20, 30 years ago, we were thinking like that. But they're talking about things like multi-domain operations, right? How do we take all of those things, space, air, land, sea, combine capabilities and really get out creating effects across the battle space. That wasn't something that I got as a cadet in senior ROTC, that our cadets are having conversations. I recently visited a program and I literally had cadets. They read my bio. They knew I had just come from Germany and they had teed up all of these space questions. They were literally asking me about satellites in orbit and how do we leverage those capabilities. These are like sophomores, juniors, and seniors in college asking questions about space operations, right? And we're preparing them to do small unit tactical stuff. But it's very applicable. And I say that to say that I think this generation's thoughts and where their focus is. And some of that has to do with media, more readily available information that they have now at the palm of their hand to really understand what's going on, and things like SpaceX and some of the technology is just more readily available than for my generation when I was at this point in same point in my career that they are. So I think they are getting those things, but that's not necessarily our purpose. Our purpose is to give them those foundational technical, tactical leadership skills, introduce them to some very basic warfighting concepts that prepare them for their next level of education at their basic officer leadership course that every officer goes to. And they're anywhere from a few months to, in some cases, a year for our aviation officers who will spend that in flight school, quite frankly. But they have some standard curriculum, and then they start to really build on their specific job that they'll do in the Army. For me, as a young lieutenant, that was as an air defense officer at the time at Fort Bliss, Texas, and we really talked about the different weapon systems. And then that became a different learning environment when I got to my first unit of assignment. But it was those foundational skills, just the basic things that we do in United States Army Cadet Command that prepared me for all of those other things. So it's the foundational growth on that foundation that ROTC really lays for each one of those cadets. And then as they matriculate as commissioned officers, we continue to build on that. But they are having those conversations about some very, what I would classify as wicked problems when you look at things that are going on in Ukraine and the things that are going on in Gaza right now. And this is from an army that came out of, fighting some pretty small, not large combat wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq, right? When you think about fighting a counterinsurgency fight, and
Right.
now we're transitioning to large scale combat operations.
Once again, which
Once
we haven't
again,
seen in a
right?
generation.
Which we haven't. You said in a generation. That's what I grew up on. Looking at old Soviet doctrine was the foundation of what I got as a young officer. And now we still have some counterinsurgency operations going on. Think about Africa and some of the things that happened there, other places in the Middle East. And now we have this somewhat large land fight going on in Eastern Europe. And then we have a pretty significant fight going on, in Gaza in the Middle East that poses some different problems for, I think, this generation of young officers in terms of perhaps the dexterity they will have to have as young officers to be able to understand and go from large scale combat operations to really small, maybe counterinsurgency operations in the span of their 3 or 4 years, issue 3 or 4 years in the Army. Think about that. And we're trying to give them that. So we put them in all types of situations that create ambiguity for them, that really stress them, that help them become more resilient. And that's all done in the senior ROTC program through a host of things. I think one of the things that perhaps Cadet Command does better than any other leadership training program, and you'll get this at the United States Military Academy at West Point, a very similar mission set. Not only do you learn the theory of leadership, we put you in real scenarios that allow you to test those on a regular basis in field training exercises. And then we bring you to a crucible event between your junior and senior year or the year before you actually commission that summer. And we put you in a crucible and really test you and stress your leadership skills. I think one of the toughest jobs you will ever have in the Army isn't leading subordinates, is leading peers. And you get to do that in that summer training environment where you get that crucible event that really tests, challenges you, shows you, exposes you to your leadership flaws, the places that you probably need the most growth. And I think that's one of the unique things that United States Army Cadet Command, through our leadership training model, both classroom and theory wise, but most importantly, you get the opportunity to practice those things in real time in some very exquisite scenarios that will test you.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of training cadets, of course, in this grueling summer exercise, which is called advanced camp for many, you mentioned a lot of these new technologies that we have to prepare for, but also I think one of the most interesting things is in the terms of education that is being implemented, of course, in colleges, at the high school level, by the students themselves, as well, of course, by the many of these institutions, which is the use of artificial intelligence, generative AI, and sort of the educational process. Many universities, including the one I'm part of here, has instilled new policies, created new ways for students to use that to augment and complement their earnings. What ideas or perhaps what ways is the Army thinking about integrating that into the educational piece?
Yeah, I think this is one of the places where the Army has made some huge strides. And I think they did it right. I'm supposed to go. I've been trying to get to this course. They actually offer one at the institution where you are, pretty close to where you are. And it's a leadership data and AI course. It's a week long. It's an executive course for senior leaders in the Army, really to expose us, because it gets back to that generational thing where like artificial intelligence and the use of big data to drive quick decision making isn't something that my generation is very comfortable with. We like to have those decision things in our head and not be driven by a machine that says go this way now. We still want to rely on gut instinct and experience to make some of those decisions right and getting that. But I think we're moving in the right direction where we're exposing our leaders to that. We're demonstrating things that the utility of artificial intelligence and warfare and the practical application and the benefit of doing it. Again, my time in Europe really helped me see that. I had the luxury of sitting on the sideline and watching that fight there between Ukraine and Russia, and really observing how each one of those countries were learning and adapting, leveraging some of those things, artificial intelligence, the speed of being able to make decisions. And in a lot of cases, the unit or person who can make the best decision the fastest will have the initiative, will be able to create conditions that are best suited for them. So think about that in terms of our practical application of artificial intelligence. I think we have a long way to go. We're still a very bureaucratic system in some ways, and us giving a lot of that authority away to be able to speed up some of the decisions, really see the battle space in a way that we never have, will be something that will take some time for our senior leaders to get comfortable with. But I think our junior leaders, because they've been operating in a space to some degree through chat GPT and other things a lot more frequently with a lot more relevance than perhaps I think they will be way more comfortable looking at something that's been created by AI or big data and saying, okay, I can make a decision off of that. But I think the Army's moving in the right direction where we're building more AI savvy leaders and leaders who really understand and can utilize data and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think the critical thing is like how do you have officers who understand the system and can use it effectively, but not become entirely reliant on it
That's
as a
right.
way to lead. Um, Definitely a concern and an opportunity ultimately for the army and for other institutions to make sure it's instilled. Speaking of like different problems and challenges, as you mentioned, you were just in your last command in Germany. We have United States soldiers and other branches deployed all around the world, of course, in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, Asia as well. And so in these situations where the U.S. our officers have to interact with a diverse amount of different stakeholders, civilians, military, government, etc., it is really important to understand cultural competence and perhaps the importance of understanding different perspectives. Can you go a little bit into initiatives that have taken place, such as Project Go, which has allowed, soldiers, cadets themselves to be immersed in different cultures, and why you think those programs are really critical to build a holistic fighting force?
Yeah, I think you hit it up front. Graphically dispersed force today. Like we're everywhere, doing a variety of things in terms of our national security policy. And you can't do that without understanding. And we learned a lot of hard lessons after 9/11, being in Iraq and Afghanistan, the importance of cultural sensitivity and really understanding the cultural aspect of some of those places you're operating in. And I think we did some really good things on the backside of that really tough learning. At a lot of a lot of it started with places like West Point, but have migrated to where Cadet Command through Project Go and other initiatives we're able to give cadets an opportunity to go to some of those places really for a summer. And it may sound like a few weeks, but the impact they're able to gain, the utility of what they learn and immersing themselves for several weeks, in some cases, maybe a month or two, into a culture that maybe they're familiar with from studying in school. But now you're in that place with those people, improving your language skills and in some ways, really understanding the culture so much better. This is a front end investment in a lot of ways because I don't think, from a military standpoint, we will have the luxury to really, in any time in the future, retract our global dispersion of our forces today. I don't think we'll have that luxury. So it's incumbent of us to continue to invest in things like Project Go, where we're immersing cadets. Really, what we need to do is how do we grow that? How do we continue to do that? I get a lot of requests from those components out in the field, whether it's Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and other places where they have a desire to bring in cadets to immerse them in those environments, whether we can afford to or pull them out of a summer experience that they would otherwise get. But I think it's important. That was my second time in Germany.
Mm.
I served in Germany as a major as well, geographically in the same place, but the mission set and the countries I had an opportunity to do, not just in Western Europe, also in Eastern Europe, as the NATO alliance increased. We added 2 members. I got to be a part of seeing that and really spending some time, particularly impressed with both Sweden and Finland in terms of what they were bringing to the alliance in terms of fighting expertise, military culture, and those things. My boss also was responsible for Army Africa initiatives as a senior Army guy. So he was Europe and Africa. So also had an opportunity to really immerse in some of the challenges that we have on that continent as well. And if you think about how large and complex some of those problems are, it is incredibly challenging to think about that. But the good news was everywhere I went, I saw where we had people embedded, immersed in those cultures, really learning, building relationships that last, that are more than a PowerPoint slide deep in terms of what we know about each other and how we're exchanging ideas and trying to build security across both Europe and Africa. So those initiatives like Project Go, we really need to double down on those and give cadets those are also retention tools, right? When a cadet knows that they're going to be able to do some really things that like my generation just we didn't have those opportunities. I've since had those opportunities as a senior officer to just be a part of some incredible things and go some incredible places on behalf of not just the United States Army, but really you end up becoming an ambassador of the United States in those roles. And what people think about the United States sometimes is shaped by some young officer showing up, some captain or lieutenant, or in this case, a cadet shows up, and that's their impression of the United States of America, right? So think about that from an impact. If you want to make an outsized impact in terms of your influence, what an incredible opportunity.
Absolutely. I know I had a very close friend, Cadet Lotwin, who is a part of my battalion here, who did the CTLT actually this last summer at Camp Casey over in South Korea, where he shadowed, I believe, one of the 17th Ordnance Company. And seeing that and being a part of a different country, engaging with the UN command there, the
Right.
Rook command, definitely very. You can't have that experience in a classroom. You can't have that experience except being out there in the field. And speaking of, you also mentioned you had this during your time in Germany, this extraordinary opportunity to see two more member NATO nations being added. And in terms of the educational learning, and over in, of course, NATO, you have a dozen plus allies who are all have their own fighting forces, their own cadets, their own training programs. Could you perhaps share some stories or insights from your experience there, and perhaps how these other countries are educating and training their cadets, and what ways are we learning from them, and are they learning from us in some ways?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's vastly different. Every time I go somewhere, I have a greater appreciation, one, for just the resources that our country provides our army is unmatched anywhere in the world. So I think we're able to do things that, quite frankly, you're speaking specifically about the alliance, a 32 nation alliance, and you get essentially 32 ways of doing business. How we still have some countries where service is mandatory, right? In the alliance, we've been an all volunteer force for over 50 years. I think this is our 51st year of being an all volunteer uh, force. And that's not always the same. So sometimes you kind of get what you get in those cases. Specifically for ROTC and what we do in Cadet Command, there's no other place in the world that does what we do in terms of creating officers for not just the Army, but for all of our services across the Department of Defense. So that, to me, that is unmatched. But I do have a great appreciation in some of these small countries where they don't necessarily have the GDP that the United States have, and they were able to field a pretty quality army, right? On somewhat of a limited budget, and bring it, and they're as passionate about serving their country, being a part of that alliance, and making a meaningful contribution, not to the alliance, not just to the alliance, but to the world in terms of the security apparatus. So I think it's extremely meaningful what they bring, but they are very unique. Some of them are we're similar to the UK and what they get in terms of commissions out of Sandhurst, which is their version of West Point, which kind of the same, but a very small force. From a quantity size, I don't think what we do here is replicated anywhere. But we have some phenomenal relationship. I had this conversation today with my aide de camp about we used to have this really great relationship. For a long time, Germany trained their air defense officers in the United States. Until recently, I think maybe 2021, they stopped doing that. But this was, you're talking about an incredibly powerful relationship where every air defense officer in the German Air Force came to Fort Bliss, Texas to train alongside U.S. officers. Yeah, you talk about building some incredible cohesion and synergy around air and missile defense, and that still pays off today. Those relationships that we continue to leverage, with our Dutch and German partners, and now that's expanded to Poland, who recently acquired the Patriot missile system. Uh, Romania recently acquired it. So those like systems and like training, we bring the similar values and those kind of things. And now we leverage similar systems and are able to really solve some incredible problems at a multinational level. Just the relationships, I think, is probably the most important thing that I learned my 2 tours in Germany, the importance of building and nurturing those relationships over a long time pay huge dividends, quite frankly, when it's time to fight.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned earlier how the U.S. trains Germany's air defense team, as you mentioned over, and the air defense artillery was what you commissioned into, I believe,
That's correct.
all those years ago. So I wanted to dive a little bit now into your journey, nearly 3 decades of service. What does that look like? And really, what does that look like for you back then? Like what inspired you to join the army? What were the key decision making steps that took you on this career of nearly 3 decades? Because we have in our generation, you know, people who will switch jobs or switch companies every 2 or 3 years, if not shorter. And here you are serving for the United States Army now nearly 3 decades.
I think one of the things I would say up front, unlike my father who worked at a steel mill for 35 years, same steel mill, 35 years, that hasn't been my experience in the Army. I actually started this journey as a junior ROTC cadet in high school. Did 4 years of junior ROTC, joined the Army National Guard, and then did senior ROTC. So from that perspective, I've touched every aspect of the command that I now command. And that's probably one of the things I'm most proud of. That absolutely my experience in junior ROTC and the investment that one particular non-commissioned officer, Sergeant First Class Lewis Thomas, he's since passed away. He was a Vietnam veteran, had done 2 tours in Vietnam, and was my junior ROTC instructor in high school, and just left this incredible impression on me. First and foremost about service. He told me I needed to be an officer in the Army repeatedly, and that really resonated. And I'll be honest with you, I ran from that. I really didn't want to do it, but it kept coming back to me. My sister joined the Marine Corps. I think I was a sophomore in high school, maybe a freshman, and she joined the Marine Corps, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and that was a positive motivation for me, seeing what the Marine Corps offered her and her growth and how it really transformed her into just this incredible person. I mean, she's 5.5 years older than me, so I already thought she was someone important. And then she comes back from boot camp at Paris Island, and just physically, emotionally, intellectually, she was a different person. And I said I wanted to be a part of something like that. I didn't want to necessarily be a Marine. I wanted to test it out, I think, and that's why I joined the National Guard. I had a 3-year commitment. I didn't necessarily volunteer for active duty, but I ended up on active duty, and I had a 3-year obligation because I was a non-scholarship cadet, and I said I'll do these 3 years, and I was going to get out. I had aspirations to be a doctor, to go to medical school or dental school or something, and I actually tried to get out. I submitted my resignation, uh, and it was denied. Yeah, and so I end up going to what they now call the Captain's Career Course. It's about your 4th year of commission service. It's for captains. You go there and you go back to school and learn how to be a company grade officer, how to be really a staff officer and command a company size element, an element that's about 140 people in some cases. And I had the opportunity to do that because they told me I couldn't get out, and life changing. I went to Fort Drum, New York. I did battery command. I commanded a Avenger battery, one of the air defense weapon systems, and it was life changing. It was the most incredible experience I think I've had in the Army. And leaving out of that, I said I can do this. I think I can do this for the rest of my life. Now you can't stay a captain and be a battery commander for the rest of your life, but
Right.
that leadership experience probably changed me in such a way. Just being this is the first echelon that you own a bunch of stuff. You own a bunch of people in terms of you're responsible for their health and welfare, to some degree, their families. You sign for millions of dollars worth of equipment, and everybody's looking to you to make the right decision, to give expert guidance and all of those things. And it was just it was intoxicating, quite frankly. And then opportunity after opportunity started to come. I had the opportunity to go to Indiana University, get a master's degree in kinesiology, and went and taught physical education at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Again, a phenomenal opportunity. I had the opportunity to teach boxing, combatives, exercise physiology, and some other courses there. I taught tennis, among other things. And it was just an incredible opportunity. And just the Army just kept putting these things. So when you say 30 years in one, I've been in the same company for 30 years, but I've had a variety of very, very different jobs that I think more than anything have challenged and stretched me, took me out of my comfort zone, where my father literally worked in the same plant doing the same job for almost the entire 35 years at that steel mill. That hasn't been my journey. I've done so many vastly different things. I've been a human resource guy. I managed my career field for officers for 2 years as a human resource professional, really talking about getting folks to the next assignment, get them to educational opportunities, those things. I had the opportunity to be a battalion commander, deployed to Kuwait. That battalion commanded our schoolhouse brigade for air defense. So where all of the air defense soldiers and officers go for their training, I commanded that brigade that does that training. Then I really got a PhD in like the Army as a colonel. After that, I went to the Pentagon. This would be my second time in the Pentagon. I also worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency as a supposed to be an air defense analyst, and I ended up in the prison in Bagram being a senior intel officer, overseeing interrogations
Mm.
of prisoners, from Afghanistan that, our forces would take off the battlefield and we would interrogate them for, valuable intelligence information, something totally outside of my career field. I am not an intelligence officer, but really broadened me. So
Yeah.
I ended up in the Pentagon a second time, and I was the executive officer to the director of the Army staff. And in that year, I really earned a PhD in how the Army runs and functions. And then subsequently got selected to be a general officer, and then have had, I guess, 3 general officer assignments. I was the deputy for Cadet Command for a year, then went to Germany and did a command there in the Air and Missile Defense Command, a theater level command that strategically oversees all of the integrated air and missile defense for Europe and Africa. So just in terms of scope and scale, just incredible. And then fortunate enough to get selected to come back here to the United States Army Cadet Command and be the commanding general, which I've been doing for the last, I guess, 4 months. So just an incredible journey. All of that packed into 30 years, really 30 plus years. If you look at, I've been wearing an Army uniform since 1985, since I was a high school freshman. Just an incredible journey, and just the opportunities I've had to really be exposed to the highest levels of government and understand what the decisions that our political leaders make, the implications for soldiers, on the battlefield, what that means, and what I get to do as a leader to really bring those decisions to fruition, create success, take care of people,
Hmm.
and really return these great citizens who volunteer to be in our Army, return them back to society as more,
Okay.
sorry.
We'll cut that out.
Yeah, and return them back to society as more productive citizens, better educated, better trained people who will be productive citizens, for our country. I know that was a long ramble, but a lot to unpack, over a 30-year career. But it has been just one phenomenal journey. And you didn't necessarily ask this, but what has kept me in this long has truly been, I have fallen in love with the people and the amount of sacrifice that our soldiers and families make on a daily basis. I have nothing but respect for anyone who raises their right hand and decides to serve their country in any capacity, has a tremendous amount of respect for me. And that fuels me and keeps me going every day and makes me want to get up and contribute more and give my best to this mission and those people and to our nation, because I think our nation deserves it.
I think our last point I want to address here before we conclude this is for the officers, for the young cadets out there that are watching you and your leadership, and of course, hearing your journey out. What does it take for a cadet, for an officer who has an aspirational career to make it up to colonel, to become a general officer, to serve their nation at the highest possible levels in the armed forces? What kind of leader do they need to become? How do they need to grow in order to get there? And ultimately, how can they make the consequential decisions and learnings to ultimately become somebody to be aspired to, as you yourself have been for many others?
I guess I'd first start off by saying it takes a tremendous amount of sacrifice, right? I've probably had more than 5 or 6 years of family separation along this journey through deployments or deliberate decisions me and my family have made. I'm married. I have 3 adult kids who have all grown up in the Army, been married for 28 years. That's a tremendous amount of sacrifice. So first you have to ask yourself, am I willing to make that kind of commitment and sacrifice. And if you're not, that's okay. If you decide to serve, I don't care if you serve 3 years or 30 years, it's no different to me. But it's been that my family has been willing to make those sacrifices. We've absolutely benefited from it. I generally tell people, the keys to my success are five things: luck, timing, grit, skill, and tribe. And I kind of unpack that for them. You meet people, it's not always planned. And I've met some incredible people, and that's what I consider the luck part. I've ended up in places where I've been allowed to grow and flourish, and people have truly invested in me. Every one of those jobs I talked about, the opportunity to go teach at West Point and go to graduate school, someone recommended me to go do that. Someone invested in me and said, "Do you want to come to Germany? I think you'd be great doing this." These weren't things that just kind of fell out the sky. These were people saw something in me, and the timing. I was lucky in some sense, and the timing really worked out. You really don't control those things, though. A lot of what happens to you, particularly in the military, you don't control. You get orders and you're told to go someplace. Place you go there, you accomplish the mission, and you serve, and you wait to receive the next set of orders. The next two things you do control: grit and skill. That goes back to character, competence, and commitment, right? And I think if you look at those things and have the highest level of character, be morally, ethically sound, make good decisions, build good habits, that part kind of takes care of that. And then the grit part of that is develop yourself, take hard jobs, create resiliency, and all of those things. Become an expert in whatever field you've chosen to do. And I decided to do that as an air defender. And, I wanted to be the best air defender I could be. I read, I studied, I did took hard jobs that other people didn't want to do. And those things kind of pay off for you. And then the last part, the fifth part, is probably the most important. It's tribe. It's, surrounding yourself with good people, finding those. I have a board of directors, and some of those people don't even know they're on my board of directors, right? Some of them are leaders of industry who write, and I read their writings and I leverage the expertise and knowledge that they've gotten over many years of doing it. Some of them are senior leaders in the Army who I can call and bounce ideas off of and get advice from. But I have a board of directors. I wish I would have done this when I was a young officer. I did it fairly late. I did it as a lieutenant colonel when someone either told me or I was wise enough to figure out that I didn't know everything myself, and I had to really get advice and bounce things off of people who had greater experience, were more knowledgeable, knew things that I didn't know. And that, to me, that was really the game changer when I became part of someone else's tribe. Now I'm in the creating the tribe business where I'm able to give back and pull people in who may not otherwise get a shot, right? And really invest in individual people. And that's what I'm doing today. But I think for me, it's been luck and time and taking advantage of every opportunity that's been presented to me, sharpening my sword, becoming the best at what I've been asked to do, being, they say leaders are readers, read extensively in diverse topics, spend quite a bit of time doing that. At some point in your career, you have to stop reading Sports Illustrated and start reading The Economist, right? And you have to change the people you hang out with. I had this conversation with my kids, particularly my son. Open up your phone and look at the five people that you text or call the most, and you essentially will become the sum total of those five people. And if they're not good people, then you probably need to change your friend group and start associating with people who lift you up and challenge you, inspire you to be a better person, as opposed to people who don't do those things. So the point there is surround yourself with good people. Um, I did write these three things down before we started. I said one of them: build good habits. And I think that's something we can all do. And then diminish the things that distract you or the bad habits that you may have. Maintain high standards. Don't settle for mediocrity. Right. And that served me greatly in my journey in the Army, just trying to become an expert, being the best person from the time I wake up to the time I put my head on the pillow. Have I improved myself today? And then build trust wherever you go. This is largely a people business. We talk about equipment and machines and things like that, but at the end of the day, this is really about building relationships with people, and then really helping people attain and reach the goals that they aspire to.
Mhm.
Becomes meaningful. It gives you purpose, right, for your life and your journey. And I think for me, that's one of the things that I'll look back on whenever I hang the uniform up and say, feel like I've contributed to some people's lives, and absolutely made some people's lives better. I think I've impacted some generations of people who I hope will look back and say, I'm here, or I got this opportunity because Barnett invested in me and believed in me and made some commitments and sacrifice so that I could, just like some people who did for me over the last 30 years.
Absolutely. Well, General Barnett, thank you so much. We're extremely grateful for you joining us, sharing both your journey, your thoughts, as well as hopefully some inspirational insights for the future leaders of tomorrow, whether they're in the private sector or serving, of course, perhaps those that are in the United States Army as a cadet like myself. I think for our audiences, if they're interested in hearing more about the ROTC program, JROTC program, feel free to subscribe. I'll put a link down below for people to sign up and indicate if they want to hear more about ROTC, and we can get more information over to you. Any final words, General Barnett, for our audience?
William, thank you. This has been incredible. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about United States Army Cadet Command, what we do in both junior and senior ROTC, and the incredible opportunities that are available to anyone interested in becoming an officer or just interested in the Army and what we do to build and grow leaders. I think the Army is an incredible place to do that. And again, I go back to the opportunities I've had are not unique to me. They're available to anyone who decides to lead, right? And I think we chose that slogan for a reason, because it puts the onus on you in terms of you made this decision to lead. We didn't force you into being a leader. But when you make that decision, it comes with a host of responsibilities, but it also comes with a host of opportunities that you will continue to grow as a leader and be able to apply that to a variety of things as you matriculate from, college into the workforce. Incredible opportunity. I appreciate your time, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you.